They all liked it, so that's very good. All right, everyone. I'm glad to see so many people. It's already 2, so I think we are ready to start. So welcome once again, everyone, to this wine and climate seminar, where we're going to talk about climate change impact on the wine industry. My name is Frida, and as I mentioned before, for those that were already in the Zoom meeting, I am one of the members of the family Hansson, who is owning Hällåkra vineyard and is also organizing this event. And Hällåkra vineyard is located in the southern part of Sweden, and we produce natural wine, and also, we are organic. But I promise you that you will get to know much more about Hällåkra vineyard later on. And as I mentioned, we are physically at Spritmuseet, all the organizers, but the guest researchers, they will join us digitally, just like you are doing right now. And now I'm going to talk about what is also going to happen tomorrow, because we're going to have another event. We are going to be here at Spritmuseet, and we are going to serve our wine in the restaurant. So you're more than welcome to come here. And Elin, our technical assistant, she is going to give you the link to the event in the chat. So click on the link and make sure that you get here tomorrow, because it's going to be a sunny day and it's going to be all wonderful, I'm sure. And I should also mention that we're launching 7 wines at the Swedish liquor store this spring. So you can also go there and get our wine. And before I introduce our wonderful moderator standing here next to me, I would also just like to once again say that we are from all over the world here today. We are from many, many countries, and we're really happy also to see that you have a very diverse background. Also, before I start, I should just also go through some more practical details that can be good to know. So I'm sure you have many, many interesting questions that you would like to ask, and you're more than welcome to do so, but then use the chat. Elin, who is also here, she has talked already a few times, the technical assistant, she will then bring up the questions when she thinks it's suitable with the program. Also, we kindly ask you to keep your web cameras turned off, because we're many people, and it's just easier that way, so we don't have any technical issue or we can limit the risk to have any technical issue. And you will also be kept muted throughout the whole seminar. We will record, so that's also maybe the reason why you don't want to show your face if you don't want to be in the recorded version. And also, it's just to get the nicest experience today. It's a good idea to have the speakers viewer on. So if you go up to the right corner, you see viewer, you click there, and then you are sure that you have selected speakers viewer. That's good. And then I also have some great news to tell you, that we will also make sure that some of you, or all of you, had the chance actually to win this book, Cumulus Neurality's book, Under the Sky We Make. So we are gonna have a little bit of a lottery, you could say. So some people will get this book, and the winners, the lucky winners, will receive an email. And all of us will also now get the discount code. So you can also get this book for a lower price. And Ellie, you should add that into the chat. And I can also say it, Sky We Make, that's the discount code. So use it and buy the book. It's a very good book. I think that was all the important information you need right now. Now we are gonna start the actual program. And here next to me, I have today's moderator, Styregård, who is an author. He is a food and wine journalist, and he is writing for the Swedish daily business newspaper, Dagens, Industri.
Right.
More than welcome.
Thank you so much.
The stage is yours.
Thanks, Frida. What a great start and introduction. I'm already looking forward to to coming here tomorrow to the restaurant. Hi, everyone. So good to see that there is a quite long list of participants and viewers today. This is an exciting subject, and I'm very excited to speak with this panel that I will present of three very interesting persons. And we'll go through, I'll spend a little time with each one of them. And then we go into a section where we have a talk, all four of us. And at the end of that section, we'll make sure to bring in some questions from you if we haven't found place to put them in before. So make sure to ask your questions, and Elin will keep track on them and make sure that I get them when we get some time to squeeze them in. I would like to start immediately because there's so much to say and so much to ask here, and to talk to Kimberly Nicholas, who is an associate professor of sustainability science at Lund University. In March of this year, she published her book at Penguin Random House called Under the Sky We Make, that Frida was showing you. And it's a popular science non-fiction book. And I quote, "It's about how we fix the climate and ecological crisis with facts, feelings, and action." And Kimberly is born and raised on her family's vineyard in Sonoma in California. And she studied the effects of climate change in the California wine world when she was taking her PhD at Stanford University. So she's one of the persons that knows a lot about the subject what we are going to talk about today. So we're truly happy to have you with us, Kimberly. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Per, and thank you, Frida, for that lovely introduction. And yes, I really need you on my marketing team. It's a pleasure to be with you here. Thanks.
So what do Sonoma and Skåne have in common, apart from being thriving wine regions?
Well, I like to tell people that I live in the San Diego of Sweden. Americans seem to get that Sweden and California are roughly the same size and shape, more or less. And I'm in, here in Skåne in the southwestern corner. So maybe with not as many palm trees as people might imagine if they hear San Diego. But yeah, Sonoma is north of that anyway, in Northern California, about an hour north of San Francisco.
I think that's a good epithet of Skåne. Really nice. And so going back to Sonoma, you were, on a serious note, you were in Sonoma during last year's fire, right?
Yes, I was. My father actually contracted COVID when he was in the hospital for an unrelated injury, and I'm very grateful that he is okay, but it was very scary, and I did go back then to be with my family. And thankfully he was making a recovery, but then the catastrophic fires started last August. So that was really devastating for me to see. My family was evacuated in 2017 from the Northern California wildfires, which have been happening now every year for the last 5 years and getting longer and more devastating. And we know that those fires are made worse, they're made bigger and more likely and more dangerous by human-caused climate change. So it's really hitting very close to home.
So are there other people giving up, leaving the vineyards, or do people still start fighting, or how does it work?
I just gave a talk a few weeks ago in Napa Valley, which is where I went to high school, just over the hill from Sonoma, where I grew up, and also you may have heard of it. Sonomans like to say we're the real wine country, but of course Napa is perhaps even better known. And folks there in the wine industry are really seeing that climate change is an existential question, not just for all of us, for life on Earth, but really in particular for the wine industry, which is reliant on climate, as is all farming, and really for evoking a sense of place. So I think people are committed to doing what's necessary to actually meet the challenge and quickly reduce emissions and prepare for the impacts that we are too late to avoid. And
that's your reaction, or your parents as well?
Yes, my parents love where they're living and have lived there for 43 years, I think now, and really see themselves staying there, I think. And I also have a deep connection to that place and really love the people in the place there. But I do find it really difficult to grapple with how the nature of that place is changing. And I mean, really the trauma of being exposed to repeated catastrophe is really, really hard to deal with. So I think some people are, bringing the community together and finding ways of coping, but it is also a really huge challenge, and sort of highlights how intense and serious and urgent and present for all of us the climate crisis is.
And how is that affecting your research and your work? The fact that you're coming from that background and has that very practical experience of the effects of climate change.
I think that's been a big change for me, and it's something that I write about in the book. That I started studying climate change in 1997 as an undergraduate, and got the chance to go on research trips with experienced professors as their assistant. And at that point, climate change felt more theoretical and far away. And the experience that I've had now in my career is sort of moving towards this frontier at lightning speed, where now the whole world is really living through the climate crisis. It's something that's already upon us. We have already warmed the world and are already feeling the harms of that. And I think it's not something theoretical for me anymore. It's really a part of my daily lived reality, and just makes the action more urgent.
So I think that makes your research being both sort of urgent and in a way scary, but also, I suppose, something that you love doing. What is the area of research in wine production and climate change that you think is most exciting or most interesting right now for you?
I'm really interested in this challenge of how people cope with the challenges of climate change, and both in a technical sense in terms of what they do in the vineyard and the winery, but also in a community sense and a social sense of how communities can come together, how they can help each other, how they can draw on their strengths and build their own resilience, because we really need those skills now for the time period that we're in.
And where do you see, I suppose you see examples of amazing examples of how that actually works, how people do cooperate, and examples of where do you see some of the most exciting examples of work being done to mitigate climate change in the wine world?
I think there's some good examples from both California and Spain. So Katie Jackson and her family's winery, and Miguel Torres and his winery have come together and have an initiative. I don't want to say the wrong name now, but it's a climate initiative for the wine industry. And I think they've been pretty thoughtful and serious about setting ambitious targets that are really focused on going fossil free within the wine industry, and looking at the whole supply chain. And those are some steps that everyone needs to be taking, actually, to really connect the dots and take serious and urgent climate action. So I think that provides a really hopeful example.
And if you take more, sort of say, more regions or countries or areas, not particular producers, are there areas that are doing better and are role models for others?
Well, one thing that I found in my research, actually, when I was doing my PhD, is that, I mean, the wine industry is, of course, international, and there's a lot of communication and collaboration and exchange around the world. And there are many wonderful things about that. But one problem that I see is the homogenization within the wine industry. That, for example, our research has shown that over 80% of the global wine market is actually only 12 varieties of grapes. And that is a potential problem, because if we're specialized and homogenized, we're not as resilient to and adaptive and able to cope with change or thrive through change. So one recommendation we've made, actually, is to diversify the grapes that are grown, and to look beyond the sort of traditional list of these 12 varieties that everyone knows, and get more innovative. And there are thousands of varieties that have been developed over time, and places like Italy and Spain actually have quite a lot of hundreds of varieties that could be used.
Is that research and that work going at a good tempo and a good, do you think, or does it need to speed up or spread out, or how could we encourage that process in the speed that you think is necessary?
Well, I think one principle that would help here and is also more general is the more connected we are to each other and the more that we can share information, the better. And that is the case for the wine industry. So something we've advocated for that I don't think is being done yet, but I would love to see happen, is a more kind of open source approach, sharing information about varieties, what's planted where, how are they doing, what kind of development do they have each year, and being able to correlate that with the climate and track how different varieties are performing under different climates so that we have good data to inform, for example, replanting decisions if that's necessary. And the reason that's important is because we know from research that we have to make some big changes very quickly to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. And we also know from social science research that what helps big changes happen fast is social connection. Having trusting relationships with neighbors and friends and collaborators and people in your industry, it's really important to have those connections to be able to share and spread knowledge and to actually put knowledge into practice. So the social side is going to be really essential for us actually tackling the climate crisis.
That's really interesting. It's when it comes, the diversification is also a problem and something very important within food and crops, right? And if can the agriculture and the food world and crops learn from the wine industry and vice versa in this sense, because they are both areas needs diversification, right? Is it can they learn from each other?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think there's, that kind of collaboration would be very welcome as well. And I mean, there's some things that are quite special and unique about the wine industry, but there are many similar challenges that they face and I think could learn from other industries. And I mean, I see that happening. I was at a wine conference recently and somebody from actually Max Burgers, the Swedish restaurant chain, was speaking there. And I think that generated a lot of interest. So, I mean, I think people like to hear success stories and best practices from other industries that they can take on for themselves.
Yeah, and from a wine production perspective, what's the worst? Warmer average temperatures or more dramatic weather patterns?
Well, both can be tricky, and maybe this is a good point to just start sharing my slides. So do you see my screen there, Per? Is it coming up for you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. This is a way to visualize how grapes ripen and help us think about why climate is so important for wine growing and why climate change is a problem. Because basically what's happening during ripening is this blue line here is sugar accumulating in the grape, and that is coming from the acid that's being respired or lost and being converted into sugar. And what you want is this ideal balance between acid and sugar. The sugar will, of course, ferment into alcohol, so you don't want that to be too high. But at the same time, you want the acid to give it a nice crisp balance and have enough time during ripening to have color develop for red varieties and red grapes, and flavor potential, which is mostly happening during these last few weeks or month or so of ripening. So in ideal conditions, you have everything lining up perfectly like a ballet, and the grower just has to go out and pick at the perfect moment. Of course, there's a lot of hard work that goes into balancing the vineyard with the conditions. But what we see happening under climate change is warmer conditions, and that speeds up the ripening process and kind of breaks apart the connections or the synchronization of these different processes. So it's getting increasingly difficult to balance the right sugar acid ratio, which is happening too early, basically, before color and flavor have developed. So growers are facing increasingly hard choices. And we know that this is kind of the overall process that's happening. We know that extreme temperatures, especially during critical periods, some of our research on crops like wheat and corn have shown that the extreme temperatures can actually have the biggest impact, and hours or time periods over thresholds can be what does the most damage.
And tying back to the last question, then, if you look at these, this is the same grape variety, right? If you do you have examples of specific grape varieties that are used for diversification that are more promising handling these conditions that are coming up? That shows sort of generally are promising to apply in certain areas.
Yeah, I can show that. So this was from our work published a couple of years ago, and this is what I mentioned, that we see that it's just these 12 varieties in most of New World viticulture, so places like California, Australia, South Africa, South America, that are the majority of wine growing. And if we zoom in here, for example, in Europe, we see these white bubbles, and the bigger bubbles have more different varieties of grapevine. So Xinomavro was one that we highlighted in a recent paper, but there truly are hundreds that listed here, and even thousands in places like the collections of France that are available to be drawn from. And our research showed that most of these international varieties, or these more diverse varieties, there was a lot more opportunity, for example, to tolerate drought and to tolerate higher temperatures. So I think that would be, for example, if we're in a wine region where warming is starting to make the varieties that are currently planted there not optimal, it's much more sustainable to switch varieties rather than keep the existing footprint of a vineyard, rather than expand cropland into new habitat, because we also are in an ecological crisis, and we need to maintain remaining nature for all the benefits that it provides people and ecosystems. So we need to make use of the farmland that we have, basically, and adapt the crops that we can grow there to what the conditions are.
So in that sense, in your opinion, moving vineyards to new areas, or making vineyards of existing agricultural land is not that such of a good idea, is it?
No, exactly. And I mean, we've done research, as have many other groups, that looked at, okay, where are the climate conditions now where grape growing is optimal under different amounts of warming, depending on how quickly we get off of fossil fuels, basically. Where would conditions be like that in the future? And I think, one critical point is that we know that for human beings and for life on Earth, we have to limit warming as much as possible and leave fossil fuels in the ground and transition to clean energy and sustainable agriculture as quickly as possible. It's really urgent. So with that in mind, it kind of sets the boundaries a bit differently. And I think I have that on a slide here that, excuse me, I'll just go back. So if we look at the different adaptation potentials, this is work from interviewing growers in Napa and Sonoma back in California, that basically they saw these, or I categorized their responses in these 4 layers of, they can kind of easily adapt to things after the fact in winemaking, but that has a rather limited potential. So you can only adapt to a rather small degree of temperature change with those kinds of measures. What you do with farming in the vineyard, you can change the microenvironment of the grape, and that has some potential. Bigger decisions, like we're talking about changing varieties, can buy more adaptation potential. But the absolute biggest decision, or the biggest amount of potential change, would be to move to a new site or location. But as I mentioned, for sustainability criteria, I think we shouldn't be thinking about expanding or moving vineyards. And if it becomes the case that, Alaska and Sweden, the world has warmed so much that those are the new wonderful wine regions, I think wine is not going to be our biggest concern, because we're going to be living on a planet that is basically not compatible with a good life, and civilization itself is really in a lot of trouble at that point with that much warming. So it's better to make the best of what we have where we are now and prevent as much further warming as possible.
That's scary, but also a good ending point here. I think that, thank you for showing the slides, and it gives a better understanding. We're going to get back to you, Kimberly, and have a talk, all 4 of us. But first, I'd like to introduce Alistair Nesbitt, also from the UK. And he is a viticultural climatologist, and this means that he has great expertise in how weather and climate interface with wine production. So he holds a PhD in viticulture and climate science, and he's the CEO of Vinescapes. And Alistair, what is Vinescapes?
Thank you, Per, and hello, everyone. So Vinescapes is a consultancy. We're based in the UK, in England. We work in other countries, but we haven't been able to for the last few years, for the last 18 months because of COVID. But We're a consultancy that specializes in helping producers and regional bodies and governments understand the challenges, the opportunities that wine producers and grape growers are facing in a world with a changing climate.
And you focus only on in the UK?
Predominantly, I think we're about 70% of our work now is in the UK, and that's because we're seeing a significant increase in the number of vineyards that are being established and the amount of wine that's being produced. The rest of our work is in Bordeaux, Cognac, Champagne, and then we do a bit of work in Georgia and some work in China.
Oh, interesting. So you're a little bit all over.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we haven't got to Sweden yet, but we're hoping one day to.
It's coming after this. And but you're also working with the trade organization in the UK, right?
That's right. Yeah. So as well as being CEO of Vinescapes, I'm also responsible for the research and development arm of an organization called Wines of Great Britain, which is the industry organization or the industry body that represents growers within the UK.
The kind of organization that's just been formed in Sweden, I believe. Do you have your own vineyard?
No, I don't have my own vineyard. It was something we thought about many years ago, but we've been so busy working with other growers and producers and engaged in R&D activities that we haven't had time to have one. And I also quite like the freedom of being able to work in different locations is something I really enjoy.
And you had been really busy. We talked earlier today, planting a vineyard, right?
Yes, currently we are in southwest England in a place called Cornwall, where we are planting a 20-hectare vineyard for a client. And it's quite typical in terms of what's happening in the UK at the moment. Here, the example is we have a client who is a traditional beef farmer, and there is unfortunately no real profit or satisfaction at the moment to be had in the beef industry. So they're diversifying some of their farm into vineyards, and they're looking to put in a winery and a tasting room and turn this into a revitalized area of the country in terms of rural diversification and bringing back into the landscape a working landscape based around viticulture and wine production.
Wow, so formerly grazing land, 20 hectares.
Yeah.
And the grape varieties?
So here it is Sauvignon Blanc, and this is the first vineyard in the UK to be focused quite heavily on Sauvignon. And that's because we did a lot of climate modeling to assess the local climate here with other areas of the world, and it ties in very strongly to some of the viticulture climatic parameters we found in eastern Tasmania and northeast South Island, New Zealand, where Sauvignon Blanc is grown. So there's a lot of Sauvignon Blanc going in here, and then there's other varieties which are more commonly grown in England. So Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Meunier, and then some Pinot Gris, and a very small parcel of some peewee varietals, which are the sort of newer, more disease-resistant, more tolerant varietals that Kimberly was talking about, and they are Divico and Cabernet Noir.
And you believe you have big hopes for this vineyard?
Yeah, I think one of the things we pay close attention to is what the commercial proposition is behind a new vineyard. The easy bit is actually deciding to plant vines and planting vines. The difficult bit is actually what you do with all the wine at the end of it. So we spend a lot of time with clients looking at the overall business model and working out where their route to market is, how sustainable that route to market is, what the demographics is, and what wine they would be able to sell into, in this case, the local community.
That might be one of the things for my next question. What could we in Sweden and Scandinavia learn from you then in the UK in your process in the wine production?
Very good question. I think what we've seen in the UK, in fact, if I just share my screen, I can show you a slide. What we've seen in the UK, can you see this slide, Pep?
Yes.
Very nice.
Yeah. So what we've seen in the UK over the last 50 years is if you look at the red dotted trend line, that's a temperature trend. It's a bioclimatic indices called average growing season average temperature. So this is the average temperature from April to October. And over the last 20 years, we've seen this increase in temperature. We've also seen a relative stability in rainfall. But of course, those are just the trend lines. If you look at the actual year-to-year figures, we can see a huge amount of variability. And that variability is a real challenge in the UK for growers. We're an island of weather, so we have all these competing weather patterns, and then so that makes growing fruit hard, and then we've got climate change on top of that, so it's very difficult. So what can other areas learn? I think one of the things we've learned in the UK is that from a commercial perspective, growers have to account for increasing yield variability as a result of climatic variability. And that means from a business sense, holding reserve wine, having the ability to blend, and having a business model that's robust enough to stand years where you have very low yields and years you have high yields. So that's one thing from a commercial perspective. I think probably the most important factor is site selection. One thing, again, we found in the UK, when the number of vineyards started to increase dramatically, which you can see on this slide here, we've gone like, the hectarage has gone 300% in the last 10 years.
Wow.
So we're seeing this huge increase in vineyard area. And one of the things we've learned is that a lot of people are planting vineyards in areas that aren't necessarily suitable, and certainly aren't suitable for the varieties that they're planting. So unfortunately, we have the nasty job of going in and recommending they should have done something different and trying to work out what they can do. But the important point there, Per, is that understanding the best places to grow is critical. Understanding what to grow in those places is absolutely critical, and don't just follow what everybody else is doing. Have some variability, do the research, get the science embedded in your decision-making process, and then make a decision based on both climatic suitability, terrestrial suitability, and also future climate modeling.
Those are great bullet points. Thank you. And much to learn, I think, for us. How much of great wines do you think in, let's say, 30 years from now would come from vineyards that are today not even planted with wines?
That's a very good question, and it's a difficult question to answer. One of the things that we don't really fully understand in the scientific community is what the full potential for adaptation is in viticultural areas. Kimberly showed a great slide earlier showing the different steps that people could implement, or different processes that could be implemented to adapt to changing conditions. But it's a bit of an unknown quantity in terms of which areas need to change to what degree. And therefore, we may find that in some areas where great wines are already made, that those great wines can still be made in 30 years' time. In other areas, we are pretty sure that they're going to have to change at least varieties. And therefore, if we look at areas like Saint-Emilion in Bordeaux, they've just announced finally that they can relax the regulations and 6 new varieties can be planted in Saint-Emilion to make it sustainable and viable. So to answer your question, Per, I'm not really sure. I think there will be great wines made in new locations like the UK, like Sweden. But I really hope that some of the existing older regions can keep going and put in enough adaptation to be able to keep producing great wines. Otherwise, it's devastating on the producers, devastating on the rural economy, and devastating on whole regions.
What in terms of British wines? British wines are great success last decades, and how much of that do you think is because of a warmer climate, and how much is due to better vineyard management and winemaking expertise and other things?
So we've done some research on this, and the way I would answer that is to say that the warming climate has enabled, if you look at this graph in front of me, the warming climate has enabled a shift in varieties that are grown in the UK. So before about 2004, the dominant varieties were Müller-Thurgau, Reichensteiner, Seyval Blanc, kind of older Germanic varietals. Since 2004, and this ties in with temperature trends, there's been a huge shift towards sort of more commercially acceptable varietals, if we can put it that way. So Chardonnay, Meunier, Pinot Noir, and the success in England has been around sparkling wine. And that's because we're cool enough to have the acidity in the grapes, but we're warm enough to get viable yields in kind of 7 years out of 10. So that's important, choosing the right grapes to the climate. I think, yeah, there's big success in the UK at the moment. There's a lot of noise and a buzz around the sector, and we're seeing it grow quite significantly. So that's one positive, but it's also a little bit perverse because it means we've got a successful industry based on the back of something catastrophic that's happening globally.
So what do you think? I think you mentioned something you call the cornflake box phenomenon when we last speak. What did you mean by that?
The cornflake box phenomenon. Yeah, it comes back to this this issue of getting your vineyard site right and suitable. And it's something we found in the UK. We called it the cornflake box phenomenon, which is where kind of farmers or landowners who are struggling to have a viable, profitable rural enterprise kind of read in the newspaper about the growth of English sparkling wine whilst they were having their breakfast in the morning, and then kind of looked up above the top of the cereal box, cornflakes, looked at their field and said, oh, we've got a field that looks about right, let's plant a vineyard, and made a decision based on that. And it kind of follows, you know, the idea being it just follows the trend. But our plea is to use science, data, etc., to make sure you're planting in the right place if you're going to do it.
Is there a limit to how much vineyard land in the UK could grow? And you showed this incredible growth. Where's the optimal level?
Well, we have done some research and we've modeled, particularly for sparkling wine varietals, we've modeled all of the UK, every 50 square meters. We've modeled the soil, the topography, so terrain, elevation aspect, growing season temperatures, rainfall, extreme events, frost. We use like a geographic information package to overlay those and then tell us how much area could be available. And it's about 35 to 40,000 hectares of land in southeast England. But in all honesty, I don't think it will ever come to that. And one of the reasons being, and Kimberly alluded to this earlier, that the climate is now changing so fast that by the time the industry caught up and could plant all of that area, it may be that you're needing to replant vineyards that have been planted more recently. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is we're seeing actually lower alcohol consumption and less wine being bought internationally. We're seeing a move away from high alcohol wines, and therefore we're seeing a lot of challenges around the sector. So that growth curve looks positive, but we have to have the right climate and we have to have a market that is willing to buy and consume that wine. So at the moment, I think the growth curve is ahead of the market curve, and that's a problem.
Great. I want to check, Elin, do we have any questions coming up?
Yes, we have one question here, and that is from Isabella Wikström. And how much is the growing part in this discussion? I mean, how do you treat the vineyards? Natural, sustainable, or conventional management to plant grape varieties that you may more or less have to spray with things that are bad for the planet? Any studies thinking to that? That's her question.
Alistair, do you feel inspired?
Yeah, I'll try and answer it as best I can. So certainly one of the things that I've set up in the UK, or helped set up in the UK, is a sustainability scheme. So we have organic growers, we have biodynamic growers, and we've now launched a sustainability scheme to try and build a community of growers together who want to adopt best practice, not just in the vineyard, but in the winery. In the vineyard, in the UK, unfortunately, there is a requirement to spray because we're in a rather warm, damp environment. And unfortunately, even organic vineyards are spraying to a degree, but there's also a movement to reduce spray application. So we're looking at other means of managing pests and diseases. We're looking at sowing, or we are sowing in between vine rows with native insectary plants to try and allow the ecosystem that we're planting into to do a lot of the work in terms of disease management for us. In terms of varieties, more vineyards are now looking at peewee varieties as a point of differentiation, or at least looking at clones of more traditional varieties that are more tolerant to the conditions. So, for example, a lot of Pinot Noir is grown in the UK, but we're seeing much more German clones of Pinot Noir being planted because they're open bunches, which means we get less botrytis, powdery and downy infections. So there is a big focus on the sustainability front. The other area that's really growing and we're trying to encourage is to adopt a more regenerative approach to soil management in vineyards. And that means no more tilling, no ploughing, allowing the natural carbon capture to be maintained within the soil, which is a big, hopefully, mitigant in terms of climate change, and completely move away from having monocultures. So all vineyards in the UK will have at least grass, and we are more and more seeing, as I say, native insectary plants, wildflower mixes, and more natural habitat that we're encouraging within the environment.
Great, thank you, Alistair. More things to get inspired by there, I think. We'll get back to that subject and to you, Alistair, but I just go on to present the third person on the panel, who is Håkan Hansson, and also the organizer of this this seminar. And welcome, Håkan.
Thank you very much.
You are the owner and winemaker at Hällåkra Vingård in Skåne, and also the fifth generation of farming that land. But you started making wines in 2003, right?
I'm the first generation.
A winemaker,
yeah,
yes. And but you also have other things going on there. I know great apple orchards and cider production, restaurants and wine bars, and a lot of other events. And you are a pioneer in organic winemaking in Sweden. How are the grapes faring so well so far in the season?
What we can see today, it's developing very well. It has been a little cold springtime here, and you can say maybe it's little the season is maybe a little later than normal, and it looks great.
Nothing scary so far.
No scary.
That's good. That's good. And if you look at the specific organoleptic of the taste and smell of your grapes, looking back since you started 2003, are there traits or characters that you adhere to and connect with climate change specifically?
What we can see since we started 2003 is that we have still rather big variations from season to season, but what we can see over these 15-18 years is that we get warmer and warmer seasons and longer seasons, especially in the end of the season, for example, September month, just before the harvest.
And that are you satisfied with the way that affects the smell and taste?
Yeah, so
flavors.
Yeah, so far you can say that there is also, of course, other aspects. Our oldest grapes today are more than 15 years old, and you know the grapes coming, they start a real peak after 10 years. So you can see the grapes are producing more, what you say, well-developed grapes in general. But what we also can see is that because we have a longer season, so then the grapes also develop well, and then we can, of course, also produce wine with higher quality.
And how is the how is the change in average temperature impacting in your work with working organically? Is that affecting that? Is that making it more easier or more difficult, and in what ways?
I can say it's maybe saying too much, but we feel it's easier because still, by definition, even if we talk about a warmer climate up in Sweden, so by definition, we are still a colder climate than, of course, compared with south of Europe and so on. So, and there we have some advantage because making organic wine in colder climate, there you can use what your climate give you. For example, the higher acid or acidity, and the acidity is it's an important part for produce organic or a nature wine, because the acidity protect the wine and give it a bigger chance to develop very well.
We time back to what Alistair said. When I know that you are investing in new land when you can, right?
Yeah.
And how do you analyze that new land? Thinking about Alistair's list of important things to think about when you find the potential of some real estate. How do you work? How do you analyze it?
We analyze it. We are not still there where Alistair is, and when we are expanding our wineland, we of course see the land we have, and just in neighborhood what we have land there. But when we started, we look at aspects like, of course, the soil, and we look at a microclimate, how it was just there around in our smaller slopes and small valleys. But I will say there we have, of course, a lot of learn from, for example, what you have done in UK. So, but I will say, when we now take the next step in Sweden, we have now gone through the absolutely first pioneer phase, and now we go into a little more, you can say, consolidation or expanding phase. There we have a lot of things to learn from UK.
But would it even be possible for Sweden to learn from the UK and avoiding some of the mistakes they've done?
Absolutely.
And which ones?
Yeah, for example, selecting land for have more quality in our analyzing for which land is the best for planting grapes. Then I think we have a lot of learn from UK. And then I will say, when I look back where we started, and even my colleagues, I think we have to look much more what has happened in UK, because we are closing to them in the different developed than we are in when we, for example, looking at very, very classic old wine regions.
That's a good plan, I think. And what do you think? Will there be a specific Scandinavian or Swedish contribution to the wine world when we enter this new expansive phase that you talk about?
Yeah, and I think it's that we have been proud of what we have, and of course we have to be very open-minded. We have to be and learn a lot of what all that knowledge you have in both in classic wine regions, all that knowledge you have in research and develop all over these years. But in the same time, we have to take care of the specific circumstances we have in our terroir and our climate, because we still are in a cold climate, but it will be, as we see, warmer and warmer. But we have to take care of it's unique up here, because that's my vision, that we have to find our role in the wine world and produce wines which add something new to the taste palette. So because that's our legitimacy to be there, to add something new even to the wine world.
What do you think the consumers? What's your experience of the way of communicating this? Can consumers now be more interested in the specific, the small scale, the local than they were before? And how could you connect to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say yes. We see very clear today that the consumers have changed in their reference to what they want to taste. They want to taste new wines. They will see new tasting from wine coming into the wine world, and what I also see, and that's a very interesting thing. I never thought I should be a part of this when we started 2003. The consumer ask much more about what you are doing with wine, and we see this natural wine trend today all over the world. They want to have the storytelling and the transparency, and I think even a new wine region as we have a role to play there to show it's a new generation of wines.
Where do you think the Scandinavian, or particularly the Swedish vineyards, would grow the most in the next decades? Where would the hotspots be? Apart from around where you have your vineyard, of course.
Yeah, I think if you look the next 2 or 20 years or something, that I will say the expansion will be down in south of Sweden. And I think we have to talk about not only Swedish wine region, we have to talk about the Scandinavian wine region, and the epicentrum for that now, what we can see in the next 10 and 20 years is south of Sweden and Denmark. But I will say, when we once again talk about what type of wine we will produce, I think we will be a bigger part of the natural wine production. And I also say often to my colleagues, and when we are talking about this, we have now just left the pioneer phase, but we will be very, very open-minded to learn from the classic wine regions and, for example, from UK. But we will also use our innovative power, because we are new. We have no tough tradition on our body, so we can be very, very open-minded and try and do something new.
I think that's a good plan, really. Elin, do we have any more questions for Håkan?
It has been a little bit less questions in the chat. Please feel free to ask questions.
Yes. And you say our sense of innovation in Sweden and Scandinavia. Do you have any examples of your own innovations, of your own experiments, of your own products that you want to mention in this context?
Yeah, for example, as we know, in a colder climate, we have a higher level of acidity and a lower level of sugar, and that makes general wines with a higher acid and a little lower alcohol. And that's a trend you can see, especially among the consumers. If I say generation 25 to 40, 45, you are not asking for wine with so high alcohol level anymore, and you want to have with lower. And what we do then is try to produce wine with a lower alcohol there, that you can see when we produce the natural wine. We don't add any yeast. The other thing is that in the beginning, we thought or we felt in Sweden that we get a little too high acidity. So we said, oh, what will we really do with acidity? And there you can say, for example, when we're talking about the white wines, which are dominating in Sweden, naturally, there we have to start more and more make wines where we let them macerate with a scale and grapes rest longer before we press it. So and what's happened then is that we got a little more soft acidity characters.
So the skin maceration softens the high acidity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And this is this is a method you use for several of your wines, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we go more and more to that, what you call the orange wines, which also is a trend now.
Great. I think it's time to continue talking with you, Håkan, but also bring in Alistair and Kimberly into this discussion and talk, all three of us. And please feel free to speak directly to each other and without waiting for me to ask questions. And also to all you other ones listening, we'll make sure to bring in a few questions at the end of these 20 minutes that we'll talk, all four of us. And I wanted to direct my first question to Kimberly then to get this started. And you, from your point of view, considering what you said before about using what we actually already have in terms of farming land primarily, how do you think the UK and Sweden should think in these terms? Because obviously the UK is expanded hugely, and Sweden is potentially also expanding quite a bit in terms of vineyard land. How should we think?
Yeah, thank you. I've done some research on that actually, for example, in comparing how residents of the UK and California view vineyard land. And one conclusion, so Clara Winkler was the lead author on that paper, one conclusion there was that people in California tended to view vineyards as conservation, and people in the UK tended to view vineyards as development. So it's a question of what the current land use is and what the alternatives are. And in California, there's a lot of housing pressure. So people thought of vineyards as kind of retaining land in a more natural use, which was also what had been there for a number of years. So they were used to it. Whereas in the UK, I had a neighbor tell me, you know, looking across the valley to their neighbors who had planted grapes, and they said, this used to be a lovely hill full of buttercups, and now it's just a pile of rusty poles. So, I mean, I think, I do think that we should be focusing agriculture on existing agricultural land and on restoring and retaining the soils on existing agricultural land so that they can support continued agriculture. As Alistair said, I'm doing some work right now on regenerative viticulture in particular, and a literature survey there of what practices actually are the most effective to retain carbon in soils and increase the carbon in soils and make our existing land work for the long run, because, you know, that's a limited and finite resource. So I do think the best thing to do to make the best of what we have is to use existing agriculture land and, you know, potentially transition that into vineyards rather than deforesting or converting the remaining natural habitat that we have into agriculture is not what we want to be doing.
What's your response, Alistair?
Yeah, no, completely agree. We've done some work for, in the UK, we have different protected landscapes. I think there's about 20 different protected landscapes, and one of the biggest ones is called the South Downs National Park, which is a very, very special landscape character area in the southeast of England where vineyards have started to be established. And we did some work for the authority who were concerned about the impact of viticulture on the environment and wanted to know what the impact was generally of this increase in viticulture. And one of the things that came out of, we did surveyed a whole, well, all of their sort of community members, and exactly what Kimberly says, when the perception is that when vineyards are replacing, for example, permanent pasture or grasslands or something else, they're deemed as a negative. When they were replacing arable land, they were deemed as a positive, and that was partly because the research also showed that the net gain in terms of ecosystem services of a vineyard on existing arable land is a positive net gain. If a vineyard replaces pasture or permanent grassland, it can be a negative gain. So there's really important to consider the type of land that the vineyard would be replacing, what was there before. And the second part of that is, how can you mitigate the impact of the vineyard on the environment? So we mentioned earlier about inter-row cover crops, headland cover crops, native grass and swords, wildflowers, etc. But there's also other practical elements, like instead of using galvanized stainless steel posts, using quarten post or pre-rusted post or brown post and brown rabbit guards and all the rest of it, and not putting in huge deer fencing unless you need to. And so there's a balance to be struck between what was there before, what you replace it with, how you replace it, and then of course the last part of that in terms of how you integrate as a business with the local community. And people are much more receptive to viticulture and wine production businesses that employ local people, that boost the rural economy and give something people can be proud about, that encourage school kids to go on biodiversity trails, etc., etc. And that, when we put that positive spin on what a vineyard could be to residents, suddenly they started saying, yeah, okay, that sounds like something we'd be okay with, as long as it's done in the right way. So it's a difficult one, but it really comes down to understanding the pros and the cons and getting the balance right.
If you look at this this huge increase in the UK, what kind of land did that replace, so to say? And it's all different, I suppose, but what's the majority?
The vast majority is arable land, so monoculture, arable farming, intensive farming, where the soil's pretty much dead, and that's what it's replaced. I'd say probably about 30% has gone into pasture land, and that's where the challenges have been.
Håkan, what do you think in terms of south of Sweden? What is the most, if you want to buy land to plant vineyards, what's most of that vineyard land, what's most of that land used for today?
I think in Sweden we will have of course today we just have around 100 hectares of land for wine production today, so we are talking of very, very small areas today. We are just in the beginning, but we have ambitions, and we think that response we have got now the last 2 years for Swedish wine and the quality we can produce. So it will happen a lot, and as I said before, we will go into an expansion phase or some sort of consolidation phase very soon. And then I think especially in south of Sweden, where we have a very, very good land for ordinary food productions. We graduate the soil from 1 to 10 scale, and you can say we have in Skåne, where I come from, we have lot of land with 9-10 in quality. And I think what we have to observe when we talk about the expanding land for wine production, you very, very easily get that discussion. Shall we use the soil and the land for producing necessary food, or shall we use it for producing alcohol? What's its most important? That discussion I think we will have if we should take a lot of land for producing wine. But what we then have to do is that we have to select very carefully, because even in south of Sweden, for example, that area where I'm producing wine, it's a very slopey and not so good land for traditional farming, and the quality of the land is, I go back to this scale, it's just 5, 6, maybe 7. So I often joke about this land where I have the grapes today. My father said, "Oh, this bad land here, the ordinary crops will not grow so well there. And now I say this land maybe is perfect for producing wine. So we have to select very carefully. There I think we have much to learn from UK to how handle this discussion also, because you always have that discussion. How do we use the best agriculture and limit the area for the most important thing? And there I think we have a discussion, and we will have a discussion in Sweden.
That's important, yeah. Kimberly, do you think that wine and wine production could be used as a role model for being more climate friendly? Could the wine industry take the lead in some sense and help other areas of agriculture and production?
Yes, I do think so. And I think there's some examples where we can see that happening. And I think the reason, or one reason, is that the wine industry traditionally has been rather innovative. It's been rather connected with research and trialing new things, and a close connection between research and industry, which has been really important for development in places like California. And I think, I mean, all industries are connected in some way and face some similar challenges. And the challenge in agriculture is, how do we produce what people need, the food and maybe wine that people need and want, in the way that is the least disturbing to the climate and is the best for biodiversity and the best for people. That's the needle that we're trying to thread here. So I think there's a lot of shared challenges across agriculture where the wine industry can be leading. And for example, in talking about packaging, and that's really important for the wine industry to address, because the carbon footprint of most foods and food products has to do, the majority is what is it, not where is it grown or where does it come from. Transport is usually a small part of the carbon footprint, but really, basically, if it's a plant, it's much lower impact and better for the climate and environment than if it's an animal. And so wine, as it comes from a plant, that's fine. But unusually for wine, the packaging actually is a big part of the carbon footprint, and glass bottles actually take a lot of energy to make and transport. And so thinking of innovative packaging and innovative distribution solutions in the wine industry as a climate solution, I think could also be relevant for other industries. And for example, shipping large volume directly, say, from France to Sweden as an example, and then having people fill their own containers, or having reusable containers, so that you're not producing and throwing away or even recycling glass, but you have beautiful and reusable glass containers if you have those at home, for example, or lightweight packaging. I mean, there's lots of solutions there, but I think a lot of that, thinking more across the whole value chain, across the whole system, how can we minimize the impact and maximize the value? That is important for the wine industry and for other industries as well.
I think this connects to my next question. That was a great response and answer. And my next question is to all three of you, really, is that, I mean, a lot of the people listening here and watching are probably in trade, but producers, winemakers, but there are also certainly quite a few consumers. And what do you think is the most important thing that the consumers could do? Should we buy only sustainably produced wines? Could we buy only local or small scale, or should we focus on specific areas that actually seem to need our help or our business? Or how are there any guidelines for us as a consumers to help this process that we're talking about?
I can. Alistair, why don't you go first? I'll go after you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think some interesting commercial research that's come out recently in the UK is that the big supermarkets that sell a lot of wine in the UK have found that their clients, their customers, say or tell them that they want sustainably produced wine, organic, biodynamic, or branded or badged sustainable. And they tell them that, but what's interesting is the actual purchasing practices indicate that actually they just go for their favorite wine at the right price point in the same place on the shelf. So what they're saying they want, what consumers are telling people they want or supermarkets they want is not replicated in the sales patterns or the purchasing patterns. So I think one of the things that's really important is for consumers to really focus on, you know, where the wine's coming from, how it's being made, how the landscape's being looked after, what's happening in the winery, you know, if it has a badge or a label on it saying it's sustainable, what sits behind that. And some of that, as can be said, is, you know, looking at lightweight bottles, recycled bottles, alternative packaging, and kind of in a way putting their money where their mouth is, and you know, following through with the desire to be buying sustainably produced wine.
What do you think, Kimberly?
Yes, so depressing findings that people say one thing and do another. That's been replicated elsewhere. I was looking at some studies of that in driving behavior recently as well. So that's disappointing. I think, the question is about consumers. So I think, yes, consumers, what we do does really matter, and it sends an important signal. In terms of a climate perspective, the most important choices that we make are actually about mobility. So flying, driving, and meat eating, those are usually the biggest part of our carbon footprint by far. Wine would be probably pretty far down the list. So I think if you'll save far more carbon by skipping one flight than by, you know, agonizing for hours with a spreadsheet over the packaging of one bottle of wine or something like that. So just to kind of put in the big picture, focusing on cutting flights and driving and meat consumption are really important. But that said, we're talking about wine, and then I think, yes, what I do in the store, I do focus on packaging and try to support alternative and lighter weight packaging. I try to support smaller producers, especially if I have any kind of personal connection to them. I do try to support more local producers, and both for sort of philosophical but also climate reasons, especially in the case of wine, that does make a difference, the transport distance. Those are some of the things that I think about. But I think also it's important for the industry, you know, it's not only up to the consumer, and I think industry leadership is really important. So producers and associations need to be having the conversations and sort of setting high standards and working ambitiously toward them, and setting goals that can only be accomplished as an industry, as well as, you know, being part of this overall climate transition that we're a part of here in Sweden of, okay, we all have to get to zero emissions. How are we going to do that? What does that look like for our industry?
Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you, both of you. There's a good checklist. Håkan, what do you think? For the consumers to do.
I absolutely agree with what Alistair and Kimberly has said here. What I will add to that is that we also must have a discussion around the legislation, what you have to inform the consumer about what you have done with the wine. I will say today, wine is one of the few food or drink we are consuming that we get so small information about what the wine, how it's produced and how the process is, what you have added to it, and also of course about the package and so on and so on. Then I think we also and then I think we have to go together, all the wine workers, how to change the legislation, because what I feel when I meet young customers at our Vinotek, our restaurant at the Vineyard, is that here is a very, very big generation gap. My generation, which sometimes learned to drink wine, we were so fascinating about it. So we never should ask how you have produced the wine. That was not a good question. But the young generation ask much more about the transparency. What have you done with the wine, and how do you produce it? What are you adding to the wine, etc., etc. And there I think we must come to a point where even the legislation give more what you say, say to the wine producer, you have to open up and be much more transparency and inform about the wine.
I think that's also important points to add to this list of checkpoints for the what we as consumers can actually do in concrete action. Elin, do we have any questions to pose?
Yes, we have one to Håkan, and it's Teen who is asking the question. As the world's climate is getting warmer, which is good for cultivation in cool areas like Scandinavia because of this proper climate, that could be more and more wine producers in the regions. Have you prepared to face this challenge of the increase of possibilities?
Hello, team. Yes, what I wanted to say, how do I answer that question? I will say we have not analyzed, I think I can say that for everyone who are producing wine in Sweden, we have not analyzed that situation exactly. But as I said before, now when we are go into the expansion or consolidation phase, we have to look at this much more, of course.
Did you have more questions, Elin?
We have one question here.
Yeah.
And that is there any open source for climate modeling, sort selection? It's hard to read. Platform that will come. So basically, I think it is an open source for people to use in order to understand which wine is the better one when they are buying it.
I think this is connecting to, among other things, what Kimberly said, the importance of cooperation, collaboration, and information. So that's an interesting question. What some of you that want to answer?
Yeah, I can say a few words actually. I might just come back to the previous question as well. So in terms of what to look for, I think there is internationally recognized standards in terms of organic and biodynamic production. But then globally, there's about 27 different sustainable wine production models that exist around the world. So different regions tend to have their own sustainability scheme, which makes things a bit complicated because some are very easy to adhere to and some are very complex and consuming. All I can say is I know there is now a discussion taking place which the International Organization for Vine and Wine is involved in to look at a global standard for sustainably produced wines, but it's not here yet. Just one thing, I was just going to come back to the previous question about whether the region's prepared for an expansion. I think one of the things we've learned in the UK is that leaving aside warming temperatures on average, grape growing, even in a great climate, is really difficult. And so you need really skilled people to manage the vineyards, even more so when you're managing vineyards in a variable and warming, changing climate. So I think one of the things to consider is where will your workforce come from? Where will the skill base come from? You have a university or a college, etc., and really support that, because that will underpin the industry. And the second thing is, and I know Per, you mentioned it earlier, is to have a national or regional body that is responsible for promoting and supporting the industry, both at government and local levels. Without that, it's very hard to get the support that you will need to expand properly.
Thank you. I have to cut in here because we have just 1 or 2 minutes left, and I have to ask my favorite question to all of you, and also ask you to keep your very short, very short. And that is, if you had $10 million that you had to spend on already existing vineyard land somewhere in the world, where would that be?
I have to say I'm a little part of this So I maybe not can give you an absolutely objective answer, but I will say if you will invest and you see what's looking, it depends what you think about the trends, about the climate change, and what we will be successful with there or not, connecting to what Kimberly is talking about. Then you can say it's better if you have a 10,
need to keep it short.
Yeah, 10 billion. Then you can look at what you say, the depreciation rate of your investment. How many years do I need for get this money back? And then for me, the answer must be up here somewhere.
Thank you. Alistair, Kimberly?
Yeah, I thought about this and I still haven't got a great answer. I don't think I need 10 million. I think probably for me, I'd be quite happy with like 1 hectare of vines in northwest Italy, Piedmont. And I like the idea of rejuvenating a really old vineyard and just making a small parcel of wine from a beautiful old vineyard. So yeah, the rest of the money I'd give to charity or research center, or maybe spend some traveling the world trying different wine regions.
Great answers. But Kimberly, you could finish this off.
Well, I actually own some vineyard land in Sonoma, so I've done quite well there. And because I care about that place and I want it to be suitable as potential vineyard land and also available for future generations, I think I would spend that 10 million on leaving fossil fuels in the ground and replacing them with clean energy, because I think that is actually what would make that land more valuable in the future.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you, all three of you, so much, and all of you who have been listening. And I will not end this myself. I'll give the word to Frida Hansson here.
Yes, I get to end this wonderful seminar. And one more time, I would also like, on the behalf of Hällåkra and everyone who has organized this, thank you both, Star and you, Per, who has been here today, and you did an excellent job, I have to say.
Thank you.
A nice discussion, and I am sure that this is not a discussion that will end here. I'm sure this will also, be discussed even more probably in the future, because it's a very important topic. And I would also like to give you all who has been listening their contacts to all of the participants. So Ellen, if you would like to share the screen with some contacts, it would be lovely. So there you find us on social media, but also our email addresses if you want to get in contact. That this is a topic we would willingly discuss even further. Am I right? I think so. Thank you, everyone. And you, all the participants, will also receive an email. There you will find the link to the recorded video. So you can also watch this seminar over and over again, how many times you want. And also there you will contact. So don't worry about that. So thank you one more time, and see you hopefully again, and welcome tomorrow, because remember, there will be an event here at Spritmuseet, and you're more than welcome to try our wine, and also, of course, visit Hällåkra, Vingård in Skåne, the southern part of Sweden. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening and watching.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.